We're going to talk about the 35XV project. A lot of interesting aspects to this. I think, first of all, we've got a high school incorporated into this project, and that's an interesting piece of the mixed-use puzzle. Usually you've got commercial and residential. How did the high school become part of this, and then how was it incorporated into the design?
Well, we built a building that Dan designed across the street at 50 West 15th Street called the Oculus Condominium. We started the building in 2005, finished in 2007. And we have a good neighbor practice, which is that if people complain, which they invariably do, we try to address their issues. And so there was actually teacher parking in front of our site across the street, and we had to create a construction lane. So Xavier asked us to relocate their teacher parking somewhere else, which was a whole bureaucratic process, as you can imagine. So we ended up getting them parking about a block away. We had to get new signs, change signs, and they were really appreciative of that. So when ultimately they were looking to use their air rights on their site, which is about probably a half of a city block, they came to us and said, listen, the building next door to us is for sale. We'd like you guys to buy it. We'll give you an option for the air rights. We want you to be the development partner. And so when we bid on that site next to them, we had this agreement with them already. Every other developer said, we'll buy it subject to the air rights from Xavier, and we already had that locked up. So the seller probably wasn't so happy, but we were, I think we would probably end up being the high bidder anyway. And we bought that, and then Xavier, wanted to expand their campus, and we did that. So it was a great partnership.
And how did that influence the design?
Well, there's a couple of aspects. One is the fact that a mixed-use building, as you said before, we generally think of as retail or commercial at the bottom and a residential or hotel up above. And I think this model of using institutions that are in the center of cities, which are generally basically land rich and cash poor, as a way to expand and revitalize and so forth, is really wonderful. So with Xavier, they needed about as much space as they could get. They didn't want to renovate in place, so the addition made so much sense. They got about 35,000 square feet of space and 11 classrooms and a sort of a nice clear block of space that's accessed from the other part of their campus. What's interesting and tricky and fun and a design challenge is how do you mix the two uses together, or how do you separate them in the same structure?
So you've got Xavier High School on the bottom and condos on the
That's
top.
right. And these condos it's right in one of the most choice parts of Manhattan. They're multi-million-dollar apartments and homes, and it was one of these balancing acts where you wanted to make the development as valuable as possible to get the top dollar, and that much dollar went back in to get Xavier what they needed, so it was sort of a reflexive thing. So in terms of designing the building, we needed to make sure that the condo buyers would feel like where they were walking into this building, which the first 6 floors was this high school, they didn't feel that way, that it really felt like the whole building was theirs. And so the base of the building is a granite. It's a Mount Airy granite, which is a well-known granite. Joel just reminded me before, it's the granite of Fort Knox. And it's like a real statutory white granite. We've carved it and made the base very strong. So that's what the impression is when the residential user or guest comes to the building. Up above the setback, above the street, then the building becomes very glassy and sculpted and textured to really reflect the sky. So the design really tried to address both the street and the sky, but also the fact that there was this institutional use at the bottom and a residential use.
And our goal was to make sure that Xavier programmatically had what they needed.
Yep.
So they had to connect at 2 different places, from the old building to the new. And if you walk there now, it's a seamless connection.
Yeah.
At the same time, we felt strongly that even though it's a great high school, it's a private high school, Justice Antonin Scalia went there, some famous alumni, we wanted to make sure that the high school kids entered on 16th Street, which was still the main entrance point for high school. There's egress onto 15th Street, but if you were buying a condo and the point of the market, right after the Lehman collapse, we didn't want to have anything negative associated with the building, so we didn't want to have high school kids in front of the building, even though they are uniformed. So it was very important for us to make sure that we were not negatively impacted by the high school, but also making sure that they were happy with their program. And one of the things that was very interesting, they wanted to do, they do ROTC, so they have a big band room requirement. And on the second floor, they decided they wanted to put the band room right above our residential lobby, which gave us all types of anxiety.
Yeah.
And so we worked with them very closely, and all the doors became these extra acoustically treated doors. The windows, you can't hear any noise from the street at all coming through the windows. And they did spend a lot of money on it. They built the most beautiful music and recording studio alongside that. And it's been a fabulous result.
It sounds like the project is, I mean, these two uses are directly linked, financially linked, but as spaces, they're completely separate. They might as well be two different buildings.
Right.
So there's separate elevators, there's separate stairs, there's separate, they're like two uses is sort of intertwined, but separate.
Right. And back to the form of the condo building, like
Right.
you said, it's glassy, it's sculpted, it's kind of
Right.
scalloped away from the street.
Yes.
Is that just as the form, how influenced is it by the setback requirements?
A lot. Yeah, the New York City instituted the sky exposure plane as one of the tools in the zoning trick book in the 19-teens and 1920s. And it really has been a wonderful thing for the quality of life in the city. It protects light and air to the street, so that when you're in the street, the sky exposure planes keep light and air, makes the street a healthy and pleasant place to be in. Keeps the trees going also. Generally, and I would say the vast majority of buildings that have had to deal with the sky exposure plane do the ziggurat,
Right.
which the 1920s Art Deco high-rise style was really all about. How do you deal with that sky exposure plane? We actually evaluated that early on. Should we do a bunch of terraces in a more of a stepped ziggurat type form? And there were a couple of things that argued against that. One was the loss of square footage, because we were dealing with sort of a fixed envelope. We couldn't cantilever indefinitely over the school. We had some fixed footprint, so we wanted to use as much square footage as possible. And the second thing is with the accessibility laws and so forth, that you have to be able to wheel directly out from a living room onto a terrace. So that means if there was a setback, the living room below would have a drop ceiling. So we were very concerned about ceiling heights and drops and plumbing and all sorts of stuff. So it really led us into this notion of filling it out to the edge. And it created a great form. There was a lot of technical issues with that. Most dealing with the addressing the New York City requirement of fresh air and operable windows. And so how do you do an operable window in a sloped glass wall with water pouring down through? And we were able to work with the
Carefully.
What's
Carefully.
that?
You do it carefully.
Carefully, yes. We found a German manufacturer made basically roof windows and put them into the glass wall.
Sort of operable skylights almost?
Yes, exactly. They tilt out. What's interesting is that when you go to the building, and you feel the sloped wall, it's neither like a glass wall nor a skylight. It's this interesting, unique thing. And so the windows really feel like normal windows, but they're like skylight windows, very much so.
And like you say, it's mostly glass, but how does this facade treatment factor in? You've got these circular perforations and then angled hoods. Tell me about what's going on there.
Well, we looked at a lot of alternatives early on. And I think it was very clear to us all after looking at a bunch of things that we just didn't want a sheer glass wall. We thought it was not in keeping with the context or the sculptural form. And also we had this design issue of how do you marry the sort of base and the top. And we had this blocky base and this more sculpted top. So we used the circular perforations on the ceramic frit and the sort of scalloped fish scale angles as a way to bring the base and the top together in one vocabulary, and it makes for a very wonderful, ever-changing chameleon-like glass wall. As what's great is that the glass part of the building is way up above the roofs of the rest of the context, so the light hits in all sorts of different ways, and it really changes.
As the weather changes,
Yeah.
the building looks completely different from different vantage points, from let's say 6th Avenue or 5th Avenue, which is really interesting. I think that was the intended effect, but it really came out great.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things about the slope is that every unit is unique in the building, and every glass pane ended up being relatively unique as well. So we decided that we wanted to have uniformity, at least in terms of the window treatments. So we installed electric shades for every single piece of glass. And because of the geometry, some go up and some go down, and some go like this, and some kind of come like this. And it was a project unto itself.
What does the term smart buildings mean to you guys? A lot of people talk about smart, tall buildings, technology, something else. What does that term mean to you?
Well, to me, which should be less technical than Dan's response, to me, a smart building is a building that has materials that are put in that are not going to negatively affect the environment. Let's say paint that doesn't off-gas, wood flooring that doesn't off-gas, that there's some sustainable products, that the water has been cleaned as it comes into the building, so you don't have dirty water being drunk by the occupants, that the air is being treated as well. It doesn't have to be, with the designation, doesn't have to be LEED, although that is a way to go. But we are very concerned about the health and safety of our owners, our tenants, our employees. And I think as cities get more and more dense, I think you have to be a lot more conscious of that.
Yeah, in addition to those points, which are all great, I think the smart buildings, as it relates to energy use and technology and things like that, I really have to do it, in my mind, with this concept called responsiveness. So, to me, the best savings of energy is the light bulb that you don't turn on, right? So if the buildings with sensors and with daylight sensors and occupancy sensors and technologies like advanced dispatch elevatoring could really become more and more responsive to what the actual load in the building and what's happening to it, I think that's really that to me is what the smart building movement is about. And at first, about when it first got put out there about 20 years ago, it was more of a aspiration, and I think more and more as sensors become cheaper and things like advanced dispatch elevatoring become the more norm, and we're all into security swiping now, so the big data aspects are really starting to catch up, and I don't think at all as it's a realm of the future. It's really realm of the present.
Besides 35XV, are there other projects being highlighted by the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat this year that you find inspiring, interesting, exciting? Other finalists?
I would say that one of our competitors is the Copper Building in Manhattan, and JDS did a great job. It's a beautiful, beautiful building. It's a very worthy competition.
Yes. I think you should also note that Alchemy is renovating the Woolworth Tower, which
used to be the tallest building in the world from 1913 to 1929.
Very famous high-rise and really wonderful, beautiful, ornate terracotta facade that they're spending a lot of time, care, I'm sure blood, sweat, and tears.
Labor of love. We'll be done
bringing
this year.
back to life.